Basically, I have quite severe damage to the optic nerves. My eyes themselves, so I'm told, are perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with them. But I had it's basically an ischemia where I had a loss of or restriction of blood to the arteries that feed the optic nerves at the back of the eye. And as a result of that, I've lost completely my sight in my right eye, and in my left eye I've got a very small amount of peripheral vision, but no actual vision itself. It just is light detection. I started to get some loss of focus in fact it was my right eye in 2010, and I'd gone through a program of I was on high doses of steroids because I've been diagnosed with a condition which is called temporal arteritis, which is not arthritis, but it's a condition that causes inflammation and restriction of blood flow through the arteries, again to the eyes. And I was on this for probably 18 months, and as I say, by mid-2010 I started to get some shadowing and reduction in vision in the right eye. I went to see a consultant. They basically confirmed that this was as a result of the condition that I had, or so they thought. I had no problems at all with the left eye, but I did lose the sight in the right to a large extent. I had some residual peripheral vision, but that was all. So anyway, I carried on with the treatment, and then in 2011 I started to have problems with the left eye as well, and I was referred to another consultant a few weeks later. Stood in the garden speaking with my wife, and I'd still got some shadow and fuzzy vision in the left eye, and all of a sudden I just said to my wife, everything's gone dark, and that's it, it had gone. Over the next 3 months it was totally dark, black, no vision, no sight perception at all. End of 2011 I started to get a bit of residual light detection back, and it got a little bit better in that peripheral area of the one eye, and really it's never varied much since then. Minor variations, but you become neurotic about very, very slight changes in the condition of your eye when you might have maybe 1 or 2% vision. It's a big deal when you get a slight difference. I suppose the best way of comparing it is if you're in a completely blacked out room, then it surrounds you, you've got no signals coming in at all. If you've got just normal sun or moonlight coming through windows, through curtains, you do get a bit of light and you can see a little bit, and that makes a big difference when you're trying to negotiate your way around. So anyway, in my case, I lost my sight effectively. I lost the rest of my sight suddenly, and therefore I had to then face the challenge of dealing with living without vision, and that was a major problem, and a major psychological problem as well as a physical problem from the start. I think one of the first things I realised, you do lose a tremendous amount of independence and self-confidence, which you've got to get back. It's a very traumatic experience, and it takes, well, literally it takes years before you can really say you're past it. You can get to a situation, as I think I have over the last 7 years or so, of saying, well, okay, I accept the condition, I can live with it, but you still do have your bad days and your good days, and your days when you try and do something which is a real challenge, something you may not have done before or done for a while, and it's traumatic, and it makes it very difficult. But I would say the biggest problem you've got to deal with is not loss of vision, it's loss of independence. I had great difficulty accepting the situation and adjusting to it, and I became very stressed. I've never been an easy patient because I've always been independent, but I did have difficulty, and the family supported me all the way and as much as they could, especially my wife. But I just felt so frustrated. I think I can probably illustrate it because even now, I used to enjoy when I had the time doing DIY and working on a car and things like this. And even when now we've got to get a handyman or a tradesman to come in to do something, or my wife decides she's going to do it, I don't feel comfortable with it. I almost feel guilty because I can't do it and I can't help. And that causes, it upsets me, because I just know what I would like to do and what I've always wanted to do, especially helping our daughters and the families with things like moving home and helping them redecorate and sort things out. And unfortunately, one of the biggest regrets I have is that I actually lost my sight completely 3 months before our granddaughter was born. That's our granddaughter, who is now 7, and I've never seen her, and I haven't seen our grandson, who's 4. I have a good relationship with them both, and our granddaughter in particular. It's amazing, especially in the last year or so, how much she now understands and helps me. We were away last week on holiday, and our granddaughter was walking me around and guiding me around, holding my hand, and you know, and the little one was coming back to my wife and myself when we were sat on a beach, so kept coming back up from the sea to check we were all right and then going back. So there's a good side to it as well as the bad. Because of the challenges of mobility and the challenges of keeping in touch with friends and acquaintances and going out and doing the sort of activities you do, like I was with golf, your lifestyle changes tremendously, and it's inevitable that you become insular, you become isolated because you can't go out, you don't go out, you've got to be retrained to learn how to get around even and use a white stick, and then you start thinking about public transport, and it becomes a major challenge. I mean, in my case, I've never been on public transport for probably 40 years. I've driven everywhere. It is a major, major change in your whole lifestyle and your relationships with your family as well. So I had to try and adjust to that, but it was a great sense of loss. I've got to be honest, it was. And I didn't really understand it at first. The way I tried to deal with it was I did what I've always done, and that is I threw myself into something else, and I set myself goals and objectives, and just worked hard on those. Basically what I did, the first thing I did was I decided I needed to relearn how to use a computer without sight, for which I soon found out that I also needed to touch type, and I'd been a 1-finger or 2-finger typist for all of my working life, basically, when I'd been involved with using a keyboard. So I had to do that, and one of the biggest challenges I had is at the time I lived in the Midlands. I had no access to any support whatsoever. My experience was that the consultant was very good. He provided me with a certificate of visual impairment, and all he could offer me was he suggested I get in touch with social services to see what help I could get and what support I could get. I did that. I had a visit at home from a social services representative from the authority I lived in. He had a list of questions, a questionnaire on a clipboard, and he started on them, got halfway down the first page, closed it all up and said, "I'm very sorry, Mr. Aston, there's absolutely nothing I can do for you." So I said, "Well, where can I get any help and support?" He said, "I don't know." So I said, "Well, I do know, I've heard that there is a rehabilitation service that I should be able to access." It turned out there was one rehabilitation officer for the whole of the county I lived in. And he was located about 30 miles away from where I lived. So where I went from there was I decided that the only way I was going to get anything was I was going to have to go out and find it myself. So I was on the telephone a lot. I contacted people like RNIB. I eventually managed to get some support from one local charity, which I'll forever be grateful for, and they gave me an hour a week of computer training. And I went through the whole of the qualification system which you go through before going back to work if you have a visual impairment, and because there are systems which do this for you and you can go back to work. I didn't want it for that, I just wanted it so that I could be independent as far as I could be. So I went through all that, and as a favour to the instructor, who was also an instructor at the local college, I went and did the examinations because I was listed as a student to him. So I think that was brilliant, and what I did, I went and I bought a new computer. I still spend probably best part of a couple of hours a day on that. I hide myself off in a little study I've got because my wife doesn't appreciate the computer talking to me all the time I'm on it. Gets on her nerves. So I do that, but that's the illustration of what I did to try and deal with losing my vision. Was I deflected. It was deflection basically. I focused and worked hard on doing what I wanted to do, and didn't allow myself time to dwell over what had happened and become depressed, because isolation and depression are the two natural reactions. I think everybody who's got a vision problem experiences it and will experience it for a long time at various levels, but you just come to deal with it. It's a bit like bereavement, that's what I was told anyway eventually. I didn't realise at the time. I missed the company of my friends. I missed the social side of being involved in a sport, which was golf in my case. So again, I went out and I found a golf course or a golf professional who taught and ran weekend courses for the British Blind Golf Association, which is part of British Blind Sports. So I would say if anybody, and I found this on a few occasions, if anybody wants to get back into a sport, get in contact with British Blind Sports, and they have blind sections and blind specialists in virtually every sport you can possibly think of, from football through golf as I did and everything. And you can get back into things, and you can get your contact back and regain all of the social side that you get when you're involved in a sport. So I did that. I did a 6-week course. I then went back and started to play with my friends. I suppose one of my greatest achievements in my life is that when I went back to playing golf, the first time I went onto a full-size golf course with a friend of mine, I actually got a hole-in-one, which the club publicised, and it got out, and I finished up being interviewed on Sports Talk, on Radio 4, on the Radio 4 programme, In Touch, which is a programme for blind and visually impaired people, which many people will know about. Local press, golf magazines. I was getting stuff coming back from the States and India and all over the place. Couldn't believe it. And anyway, the only thing I say about that is I did get a hole-in-one. I'm very proud of that, but I don't say too much about the fact I didn't get a hole-in-one at all in the 10 years I played before that. So there's a bit of luck was involved. Anyway, the thing was deflection, keeping your mind occupied, being positive, moving forward, setting yourself goals. That's what I did, and that's how I moved through it and got over the worst of the condition. I then moved on. Just about the time we moved up here, I decided, right, I was going to learn how to use a smartphone. And I will say that having learned how to use a smartphone, having learned how to use navigation apps, location apps, all other sources of information, such as a silly example in one way is I found for the first 5 years or so after I lost my sight, if I wanted to know what was on the television or even on the radio, if I was going to listen to that, then I had to ask my wife. Now I can access electronic program guides. I can actually control the television. I can control the recording systems that I have. all through and using the smartphone. So it is an amazing source of support and to allow you to increase your mobility and also your independence. It's the best thing I've ever found so far as independence is concerned. So I'm a bit of an enthusiast of equipment, and I now have smart speakers for voice activation and various other things, but they all help a lot, and the only thing you can do is get advice, get help, talk to people, and the best thing you can do is get information from people who are themselves visually impaired or through that source. And you know, it's amazing what you can do now and how much more independent you can be. People do find it difficult. Well, I've never found anybody, and I mean this seriously, I've never found anybody who was refused to give me some help or support if I've asked them for it. If I'm out in the road and I want to cross the road, somebody will come up to me. The big thing for me is if somebody asks me if I need some help and could they give me some help, then I will always at least thank them, and I'll give them an explanation if I don't want them to help me. Because my view is, if somebody comes up and asks me if I want some help, and I just refuse or don't respond to them in the right way, they may not offer the same thing to somebody else later who needs it more than I did or do. So I always keep that in mind, and I always mention that to people. But one thing I would say is that, as I mentioned right at the start, is as far as loss of independence and becoming isolated, I find most of my friends now are visually impaired. And that's not by design, it's because of having the contact with people through societies and through groups, and we have a common understanding. People have all been through the same experience and have the same sort of understanding, whether they've got a minor sight disability or whether they're totally blind or whether they're on a progressive sight reduction. It doesn't matter. There's an understanding there, so you're actually talking to people who relate and have empathy with the situation that you have, and it's good. Now, I also have friends who are visually sighted and have no problem with vision, and the family, of course, and they help and they understand things a lot. If there is one big problem, I think, with people like myself with visual impairment over people with, say, a more obvious physical disability, is that when you're trying to do something, people try to do it for you. It doesn't help greatly when somebody does something for you, but if they can help you to do it yourself, that is a major benefit they're giving to you.
Our videos are helping people across the world. If you found them useful, please donate on our website so we can keep making more videos like this in the future.
Henshaws, supporting people with sight loss and a range of other disabilities to go beyond expectations.